I am Dracula. I bid you welcome.
Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Thou shalt rise again.
Power to make multitudes run, squealing in terror at the touch of my little invisible finger.
Do you believe in werewolves?
To a new world of gods and monsters.
Hey everybody, I'm Chad. I'm here with Ken. How you doing tonight?
Doing well, my friend. How are you?
Pretty good. So, Ken and I kind of talked about some of our similar interests we've had. You guys have listened to him, obviously, on Eternal Midnight podcast, where we do the retrospectives of different franchises. And obviously, you guys know Ken and I have a deep love for horror films. And we were just kind of like, what's something... Can't really say what hasn't been done. Everything's been done. But we both knew that we both have the Universal Monsters box set. And we're like, you know what? Let's make our way through the entire thing. Chronologically, let's go through all of them. And when we're done, maybe we'll grab a few surprise, histories of horror that weren't in there or something. Because I know there's even a ton more that weren't in there that you'd want to talk about. Like, Freaks isn't in there. I'd love to talk about that at some point.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And another one that I think could be fun to talk about later on maybe is The Old Dark House.
Mm-hmm.
That's another good one, yeah.
Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so for now, we're just getting started with just the box set. So anyone out there wanting to know what's coming next, all you have to do is look at the box set and you'll see the exact order we're going in. So episode 1, what are we getting started with, Ken?
We're starting off with the first talkie in the Universal Monsters lineup, which is classic Todd Browning's Dracula starring Bela Lugosi.
I don't even know where to start with this one. It's, as a child, just the character, everyone, it feels like Dracula is like as ingrained in society almost as today, like the MCU is for kids. You know what I mean? Like when we were children, you'd hear Dracula. And for me, it was always like, when I heard like Vampire Dracula, cartoon-wise, I always jumped to Count Chocula. But it's like, we always knew who Dracula was and what he looked like. It was Bela Lugosi.
And I think that's the thing. I think so many people don't, probably a lot, of course, younger people, don't even know who Bela Lugosi was. And yet, when they think of Dracula, it's his Dracula that they think of. They think the Hungarian accent. They think, the slicked back black hair. And it's just, that's because he is so what that role is. I mean, Gary Oldman has done Dracula. Christopher Lee has done Dracula. Neither one of them had that look. Neither one of them had the Hungarian accent. We always culturally come back to Bela Lugosi as Dracula, which is such a great testament to what he has done with that character.
Especially for a movie that, we're coming up. It's 10 year 90th anniversary this
90 years old.
It's insane. And it's sad. Like, just to stay on Bella for a minute, it's like, it feels like after this, because of some of the choices he made when taking roles, obviously, kind of, someone else stole the spotlight from him, who we'll talk about in the next
We'll
episode.
talk about him next.
But I feel bad for him because it's like I haven't, aside from his role in Son of Frankenstein
as Igor.
Igor, I feel like outside of that, I haven't seen much he's done.
Aside from Dracula, some stuff so there's one movie he did back in 1932 that's really good. It's public domain. You can find it anywhere. Is White Zombie, which
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
It's really good.
That one though.
We should put that in our grab bag of extras at the end. But it's actually, like, that's the thing. Also in the later Universal monster mashup movies like House of Dracula and House of Frankenstein, he didn't come back. John Carradine filled in the role of Dracula, which is such a disappointment. He was only Dracula on screen twice, the original classic and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Now, did he say why?
I can only imagine it's either he didn't. I can't imagine they wouldn't want him for the role. I can't imagine that would be it. He probably just didn't like the scripts. I understand he hated being typecast. He hated always being the foreign villain because he wanted to be a dashing leading man. But of course, Hollywood at the time, having that thick Hungarian accent, he couldn't escape being typecast.
Okay. Well, and it's a shame because it's like, and anyone who knows the story of what happened to him in the end, or has even seen Ed Wood and knows that that's not actually how it went. Which can you tell it, because Ed Wood is one of your favorite movies?
Yeah, so Ed Wood, of course, the Tim Burton film in which Johnny Depp plays the notorious, quote, worst director of all time, outside of Tommy Wiseau. But he, it's mostly a fictionalized story of what happened, but Ed Wood made these terrible movies in the 50s, Plan 9 from Outer Space, Bride of the Monster, Glen or Glenda, and Bela Lugosi, who was sort of down on his luck, wasn't getting many roles at that point, would star in these crappy movies he made because, hey, it was some paycheck he was getting, it was some publicity he was getting, and the movie is, it goes a little far, but Lugosi, was down on his luck. He was a drug addict by the end of his life, tragically. But one thing that's sort of interesting to me and that I sort of like to know is his son, Bela Lugosi Jr., is actually a lawyer, and I'm not sure if I've ever told you this even. Bela Lugosi Jr., represents actors who are being mistreated by the studios.
Good for him.
Which is a great, thing to do for the legacy of his father.
That's awesome, because it's like we look back at this movie like historically and what it is, and where, like, because it's like most of the rest of this cast, they still went. I mean, like, who else? Dwight Frye, Edward Van Sloan. I mean, these guys still had some pretty big roles coming up, even within the horror genre. And Bela Lugosi, kind of like you said, he got Igor, but that was kind of about it.
Yeah, I have a box set, one of those box sets of like 50 horror classics for $20, and they're all mostly, crappy public domain.
I've got one of those too.
The quality is really bad, but you got some Bela Lugosi movies in there, but I mean, again, they're not great movies that he was in.
But then again, so was Dracula? So let's talk about a little bit more of the history. When Dracula came out, was it a boom, or was Frankenstein much more of a boom?
Pretty sure Dracula was a big hit. I couldn't pull. Give me a moment. I'll pull up actually the numbers, but no, it was a big hit, and not Dracula, Bela Lugosi. They're pretty synonymous actually, but Bela Lugosi was a big star because of it, and it's sort of. That's the old story. He felt like he was such a big star. He was such a, sexy, dashing man that when they, supposedly the story goes, they offered him the role of the Frankenstein monster and he turned it down. And, the rest is history
weird.
with him.
You think he would have wanted it, because if he didn't want to be typecast, like you said, for like his voice, you think he would have wanted to be the monster, because the monster did not speak in the first movie, obviously.
Was silent, but I think it comes down to the fact that the monster is this big brute, and he wanted to be a sexy, dashing leading man,
which makes sense. But hey, not everyone can be a Brad Pitt.
Right. Okay, so let's see here. So the original Dracula, its budget was a little over 340,000, and oh gosh, I'm not sure if it has a box office. I'm not sure if they had box offices back then, but it was a big hit, I know.
So culturally, it did its job.
Absolutely.
Okay. Because this is also back when movie, like anyone listening obviously knows this is 1931, no internet. And most movies also did not, from what I understand, most movies did not go, they obviously didn't go worldwide, but most didn't span the entire country, did they? They just it came out in certain areas at different times, right?
Maybe. I'm not entirely sure about that. But
okay.
Got anything else you want to tackle here before because I'm going a little blank here.
You're good. So yeah, just let's dive into this movie, what it means to us, and just some scenes that maybe stand out to us. So like, was this like one of the first ones you saw when it came to the black and white Universal monsters?
It was the first, actually, and I can tell you the story.
Do
It's
it.
I was 7 or 8 at the time, and it was around Halloween time, and they were doing reruns of Elvira's, movie marathons that she would do. And my dad was watching it, and he was just like, son, come watch these old movies with me. And I'm like some stupid kid that was just like, this is going to be boring. Go back to the big boob lady. No, clearly I did not say that as a child. No, but
You were thinking it.
right? No, but I sat down and I watched it, and I just heard Bela Lugosi speak, and it sort of clicked with me like, wow, this is the Dracula that I know of, that I've seen parodied in Scooby Doo and in the cereal commercials, and this is what it is. It's like, this is the original, and I was just transfixed. I was hooked. And Dwight Fry as Renfield. Let's talk about him.
That laugh. It's
Yeah.
like, it's hard nowadays. Like, it seems like whenever Hollywood tries to do something like creepy, it comes off as goofy, and when they try to make something silly, it comes off as creepy.
Mm-hmm.
His laugh and his face combined is so haunting.
Those eyes of his, the crazy eyes, and just his a lot of his lines I love. I mean, of course, you got all of Lugosi's lines, just the children of the night, what music they make. And but I mean, I love some of Dwight Fry's lines as Renfield. My favorite is probably when Van Helsing and the other leading men are questioning him, and they mention Dracula. He's like, Dracula? I've never even heard the name before. And it's just like, oh well, that'll throw him off your back. That'll
His acting when he's like that is so over the top, but it's so entertaining watching him. Like, Dwight Fry has such an energy.
Well, and
his character.
You got to realize that this was, of course, the early age of the talkies, and so a lot of these people were also theater actors. And theater acting naturally is more big and bombastic, and I think back then, especially, it translated to film. It was, acting didn't have to be realistic; it had to be entertaining, and that's what you're saying here. Is it wasn't, it was over the top, but it was great. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's like it like, some people could look at it and be like, look at him, he's like hamming it up, but it's like, no, he's also playing an insane person, and it's like, he's insane. He is going over the top because he's, like we see, he's mentally tortured, and he's just like losing his mind. So he does it perfectly.
I have to ask, what's your I've never totally understood this. I've never really understood what Dracula does to Renfield. Does he turn him into a vampire, maybe like a lower tier vampire who doesn't feed on humans but feeds on insects and rodents?
As that's something I never understood either, because it's like,
okay,
the brides come in, they're going towards him, he passes out, Dracula basically
shoos them away,
and then it says in the synopsis, it says he attacks Renfield, and then in the next, when they're aboard the schooner, Renfield is a raving lunatic slave to Dracula.
Yeah.
So it's like, what is it exactly?
Let me
even in some of the Hammer films, we've seen Dracula has different kind of like slaves there, but it's not like, like when he's going, like when Dracula with Mina, with his eyes looking at her, this isn't the same, because Renfield isn't the same as like under a trance like she is. He's more insane.
Yes, exactly. And well, anyways, aside from him, I want to actually talk about the fact that you'll notice in this movie there is a noticeable lack of music. And it's because, again, it was the early talkies. And as I understand, back then they didn't think, because sound was now in, they didn't think to add music in the background, because they thought, the movie sound speaks for itself. And really the only time you would hear music in a movie is if it's within the story being told, like if there's a band playing or something. But honestly, you can actually, I think in our box set, you can have you can listen to it with a score added by Philip Glass.
Ooh.
And I've listened to it. It's fine. It's interesting, but I actually these movies might not be very scary, but I think what these, or especially early ones, have is just there is a creepiness when Dracula is in Mina's room and he's approaching her, and you just hear no music, and you just see him just creeping up on her. It adds some creepiness to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, less is more, and sometimes you notice when it comes to movies, sometimes when mistakes happen, that's when something truly magnificent really comes out of it. Like Jaws, if the shark had worked, it would not have been the same movie, would it?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's just it's better when you don't see it. And
Speaking of what you just said about not being scary, it's true. I mean, these movies aren't scary. They're not. But I think to nowadays, when a movie comes out and people are like, this, when Paranormal Activity came out, some people found it terrifying. I'm not gonna lie, I was one of them.
same.
Not because I thought it was real, but because it had a very realish setting to it. And it's like, for me, I'm one of those people. If I watch something like Paranormal Activity 1 or 3, like 3 is my favorite. If I watch something like that at night, it does creep me out. So, and then people, like, oh, it's not scary. But it's like, yeah, but you got to think back to the 30s. There wasn't...
Back then, when the silent Phantom of the Opera came out, and when Lon Chaney is unmasked in that movie, people reportedly fainted back then. And it is a generational thing, I think, because, I do think The Exorcist is creepy. It does scare me. Some people find it laughable. But in the 70s, you can see the footage of people, like, being interviewed after seeing the movie, saying they were crying, they were praying, they were passing out, they were vomiting. These things are generational. And I think, it's one of those things, like, I think it's people had just never seen anything like it before is what it comes down to.
Yeah, so it's like, because you've also seen it, like, again, being in the horror circles that we're in, we've even seen people say stuff like certain movies that aren't scary aren't really horror films. I'm like, well, then none of these are horror films either.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, no, horror is a genre, and that's what these are. These are horror films. There's also horror stories, horror books.
My friend Matt Bledsoe, who hosts the Film Feast podcast, he has put it so well in saying that, even if I see a horror movie and it doesn't scare me, that doesn't mean it's a failure. And I don't know why horror sort of gets that pass, because if you see a comedy and you don't laugh, you sort of think it's a failure. If you see an action movie and you're not sort of thrilled by the action, you think that's sort of a failure. But for some reason, horror gets a pass as long as it's entertaining. Great example, Dr. Sleep. Didn't scare me at all. I was not, but it's such an entertaining movie. I still am not going to take that away from it.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Horror doesn't have to be scary. Plenty of things that are a horror, there's nothing scary about them, but they're still a horror film. So that's why I look at these, and it always makes me laugh when people say these movies aren't scary. I'm like, well, no kidding, they're not scary. Of course they're not. Like, not even when I was young, and kind of going back to what we said when you first saw these earlier, honestly, okay, so I grew up in a household where my parents kind of had us watch like kids movies because I'm the oldest and my youngest sibling is 12 years younger than me. So we always had kids movies on, basically always growing up, like in the family room. And honestly, I always knew about these. Like, I rented books from the library looking at Dracula, Frankenstein, The Wolfman. So I knew there were these movies, but VHS tapes, I never had them. And then it kind of hit like a stage where I just kind of like, I didn't forget about them, but it's like I just kind of was doing my own thing with movies at the time. And then, we'll reference it, I don't care. Cinemassacre dropped his very first history of horror. And
back in 2007, can you believe it's been that long?
It's insane. And I remember when that came out, that like lit a fire under me. And I'm like, now I need to start watching these movies. And that's when I got into them in 2007 when I was 21.
And what's funny is I grew up with him when I was a kid, but throughout middle school and like high school, I wasn't paying him much attention. And when he reintroduced that, how old was I in 2007? I was I was 14, I think. I was 14 going on 15. And and I saw that and I was just like, man, I remember those old movies. I got to go back and visit those again. It's been so long and I remember loving them so much. So yeah, that sort of relit the flame for me.
I mean, he did a good job. Again, I'll just say it. Thank you, Cinemassacre, for
We're both big fans.
because it's like he did an amazing job, I think, with all of the years of Monster Madness. But it's those early ones that'll always be like my favorites.
Absolutely. Another actor that I think deserves a shout out in Dracula is Edward Van Sloan as Van Helsing.
Yes, absolutely.
He's not as good as Lugosi or Fry, but he deserves the shout out. He's definitely the bronze medalist in the movie.
And it's funny because it's like, I think I remember seeing something online once where somebody was like, his version of Van Helsing is so boring. And I was like, which version are we comparing him to? Because I hadn't seen the Peter Cushing version yet. Like I couldn't find any of the Hammer films to watch. So I was like, are we talking about that one? Because I was just going off of against Cinemassacre. But I was not expecting the answer he gave. You want to take a guess who he was comparing it to?
Was it Hugh Jackman?
Yep.
Okay, well that's not fair at all.
I was like, what kind of a comparison is that? That's like saying Bela Lugosi never turned into a giant bat and fought the Wolfman, so he sucked. It's like,
yeah, exactly, and it's not.
It's comparing night and day. You can't compare that role.
And that's not what these movies were about. You know, I was talking before we started recording. I'm gonna mention now is, you know, yeah, there aren't many great special effects. I mean, the bats in this movie are laughable. They're clearly on strings. But you know, you have there's the part where Jonathan Harker, Dracula, you know, steps aside and he, you know, leaves the scene, and then they hear a wolf howl. Jonathan Harker runs off. He's just like, what's that running across the lawn? It's like a huge dog. And they're like, or a wolf. So off camera, he transformed into a wolf. And another example that, I told you about before we started recording was, you know, when Renfield first comes to Dracula's castle. And of course, there's so many iconic lines, you know, listen to them, children of the night, what music they make. But there's the moment when Dwight Fry starts coming up the stairs and you see Dracula sort of walk past, and you can see and then when Renfield goes to where Dracula was, he sees there's a huge wall of cobwebs. We didn't need a special effect featuring Dracula phasing through the wall of cobwebs without breaking it. It's implied. We see when Dwight Fry has to break it up with his cane, we know it happened. And, you know, say that's for budget cuts, for you know, because of the Great Depression, whatever, it's better off for it.
Absolutely. So I'd say probably the only issue I have with it, and I wouldn't even really call this an issue, is there are some spots at the end where it feels like a lot is done off screen. Now, was some of that due to like the graphic nature of like the staking scene where they killed him?
I think so.
Just because it feels like the brides were in it, but they didn't really do anything. Were there missing scenes with them? Explanations for them?
I have no idea about any of that. Okay. But yeah, they sort of do disappear. Like they're at the beginning of the movie and then they're gone. But you know, yeah, him being staked in the heart is obviously done off screen. But you've got like there are different cuts where you can hear him scream in the background, or you know, there's a cut where you can't hear him scream because you know, the MPAA, I don't think it existed back then, but whoever the censors were came and they said, hey, cut that out. We don't like that. But, you know, it's what it is. Also, I will say this, for a lot of these old movies, especially the early ones, they do feel a bit rushed at the end, don't they? Like, a lot has to happen. Okay, let's wrap this puppy up.
Some of them don't even... We'll get to it when we get to movie number 3, but it's like, some of the endings, they just kind of like, the big thing happens, and then like 5 seconds later, the end. I'm like,
Exactly, the end.
I'm like, I can't even have a second to breathe before the movie
Exactly.
ends.
No movie would do that today. Could you imagine if in
Okay.
Doctor Sleep he killed Rose the Hat and then it just fades to black and says the end?
It'd be like, okay, did the last 15 minutes of the third act drop out or something? But also props, because these movies also don't end. Kind of like movies nowadays end, where there are no jump scares with these. There's no promise of a sequel. These movies all start and end their story, which, if that's it, that's it. Boom, the story's done. You got it. Move on to the next thing.
It is, but there are some, including James Rolfe, who sort of consider this the first shared universe of movies, because Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman all interconnect.
And you know what? They are. And Universal tried, and we all saw what happened with the Mummy. And you know what?
Recently.
I still stand by, if they'd continued on from Dracula Untold, they would have been better off.
Dracula Untold, I didn't think was I don't think it was very good, but I don't think it was as bad as people made it out to be.
It was one of those starts that, okay, look at what went wrong, but it's like you still had the Dracula story. It entered in modern day. You can still do everything you want, but
I believe, didn't Dracula Untold happen, and then wasn't I, Frankenstein shortly after that?
I'm not 100%.
I'm gonna look that up right now, but let's see. So yeah, Dracula Untold came out in 2014. And then I, Frankenstein. Let's see here. Also came out in 2014. So yeah, I remember. I'm correct. I remember when those both came out. I thought, like, are these connected? Like, is this gonna be a shared universe? But that didn't go anywhere. But I think Dracula Untold was definitely better than The Mummy with Tom Cruise.
Woo! We can talk about that someday. Far down the line, but
Yeah.
But going back to this Dracula, I think probably the only thing we have not brought up that I think this guy definitely deserves an honorable mention is Renfield's attendant, Martin.
Oh, Martin. It's so funny. When I talked about Dracula forever ago on Film Feast, I gave Martin a shout out. And Matt thought it was the strangest thing, but I had to bring it up. And
he's like the character that, like, in this world going on where, like, Van Helsing is dead serious, Renfield's insane, Dracula's doing what he does, and Martin's just kind of like rolling his eyes at everything, like, okay, you insane fellow, let's get you back to your room to eat your flies.
Exactly. It's just like, who wants to eat flies? You do, you loony. And it's so great. There's the moment when he's with the nurse, and the nurse is like, he's crazy. He's like, they're all crazy. They're all crazy except me and you. And sometimes I have my doubts about you.
See, again, comic relief done right back in the day, even.
Back in the day, absolutely.
You know what's sad? There's nothing to even really say about Jonathan Harker.
He's David Manners. I feel like these leading men, and it's ironic, I think, that Bela Lugosi wanted to be a dashing leading man, given what the dashing leading men were like in the movies he was in back then. They were boring.
They're all forgettable. They honestly almost all blend together.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in fact, I didn't know this until a few years ago, that David Manners, who plays Jonathan Harker in Dracula, is also the love interest in The Mummy with Boris Karloff.
See, that's as bad as it sounds. Sometimes with black and white movies, unless an actor has something physical, like
such a distinct
striking
look
about them, whether it's their clothes or an accent or their face, they just blend together.
They're interchangeable.
There's something about the black and white movies that does that to these leading men back then. I can never, like, get a good look at them and be like, yes, he looks different than the one standing next to him. Like, if it's two guys with both dark hair, they both almost look the exact same to me.
I'm absolutely with you on it. I think another person that we sort of have to give props to, obviously, is Todd Browning.
Yes.
Who directed this one, who I believe was a silent film director before, which could also explain why the movie is so quiet.
Yeah, I could see this almost have been like at first, let's do this as a play, but then let's make it a movie instead.
Yeah, and Dracula was a play, and Bela Lugosi played Dracula on stage before he took this role.
Okay. Wow. Anyone who does theater and stage, my hat goes off to you because that is not easy to make sure
Yeah.
you get everything in one take.
Yeah, exactly. Man, that reminds me, back when I was in middle school, I went to some middle school play, and I felt so bad for the kid because he was in the middle of like a scene. His friend, or not his friend, his castmate gave this big monologue, and the kid like is holding a sword, and he drops the sword and says, "I forget what we're supposed to do." I'm like, oh, I feel so bad for you. Luckily, it's just a middle school play. You're not on Broadway yet, pal.
Right. Maybe he is now.
But I
So
mentioned,
Dracula, you got anything else for us?
not entirely sure. I mean, if you want to hear a really deep retrospective, I mean, over on Film Feast, Matt and I just gushed over the movie, and I really poured my heart and soul into it, that one in that episode. So go back and listen to that. But it's great, and for this huge retrospective where we're going into all of them, we can't go into too much detail.
Right.
Just if we want to cover them all.
So I'll put that link for that down below so you guys can listen to it. So guys, thank you for tuning in. Dracula, what did you think of it? I think it was a good start for what Universal was getting ready to do. Obviously, they had no idea what they were about to launch into. They had no idea the success and gigantic wave of horror films that were coming.
And the legacy it would create.
Exactly. I mean, look at it again. 90 years later, we're still talking about it. And there's so many dramas from back then that have just been lost to time that nobody thinks of, talks about, watches, anything. And yet Dracula's still here.
That's actually something I should say, actually, is apparently Bela Lugosi had some actor that he wanted to compare himself to and was just like, I want to be loved like him. And it's just like, well, okay, we all remember your name, and what do you know? I can't even come up with that guy's name. So you did all right, Bella.
Mm-hmm. And I think this was a good start. I would definitely, for anyone who's listened to this and hasn't seen the movie, this movie is slow.
Mm-hmm.
Do not expect anything like Dracula and Untold or Van Helsing or anything.
Yeah.
It's slow, and honestly, I do think it goes up from here, though.
Yeah, I think the next one is definitely much better paced. I will say Dracula moves like an iceberg, but you know what? Lugosi and Fry are so fantastic that anytime they're on screen, you can't help but be entertained.
Definitely. So, guys, thank you for tuning in as we begin this giant horror retrospective. I'm Chad. Have a good night.
All right, take it easy, everyone.